Hey there guys, CrossFlux here with a video of some of my random thoughts. Today let's talk about one of Nintendo's newest IPs, Splatoon. I have a love-hate relationship with this series. I could go on forever talking about what I love about this series, and just as long talking about its problems. The thing that I want to focus on today, however, is some stuff that I'd love to see Nintendo try with the series in the future. I mean, Splatoon is all about staying fresh, right? So let's not just keep pumping out the same game with updated features every few years. Let's get creative and do something special with it. I'll be presenting two different ideas that my wife and I have discussed with each other. These are concepts that Nintendo could try with Splatoon. Now, I feel these ideas would be perfect as spin-offs because they're a bit too different from the main series. And with all that being said, let's dive deep. Ever since Splatoon was first shown off, there's one particular game that it reminded me of. Jet Set Radio. Why? Well, there's a few reasons. For one thing, the art style reminds me of that modern urban look that Jet Set had. For another thing, Splatoon is all about spreading ink and covering territory, or turf. Jet Set was also about claiming turf by covering your territory with your gang's signature graffiti. Also, Inkopolis' culture seems to be revolved around these kids being into sports and fashion. It just feels like Jet Set, if you know what I mean. This leads into my first idea. Take the concept of Jet Set Radio and apply a fresh coat of Splatoon paint, ink. So have the Inklings roll around on souped up roller skates. You grind across rails and walls, laying your ink behind as you go. You'd still have your standard weaponry like splatter shots, blasters, sloshers, and dualies to cover territory from a distance. But to keep things more in line with the style of Jet Set, the ranges of these weapons would be a bit reduced, and their ink consumption would be increased. The focus would be more on parkouring your way around an urban setting. You could still be both a kid and a squid. Of course, being in squid form would refill your ink and let you climb up vertical walls that you've inked with your guns. The story could start out as something more laid back than the main series plots. Now that Octolings are beginning to integrate into Inkling society, as they escape the iron-fisted dictatorship of DJ Octavio, the villain decides to take a more subtle approach. Instead of leading a head-first attack against the Inklings, Octavio decides to send scouts into Inkopolis and infiltrate them from the inside out. This Octarian agent lays low by not becoming a turf war star like the other protagonists. They instead form a gang and try to cover as much of Inkopolis as they can, learning about the Inkling weaknesses. At some point, you overhear the Calamari incantation and become reformed. Captain Cuttlefish discovers you and you end up becoming Agent 5. You start using your scouting abilities to revert the damage that you've done. The actual gameplay missions would be very much like the ones you see in Jet Set. You could race against other characters, try to cover territory without provoking the authorities, and attack rival gangs and take over their base. Now, the second concept that I think could work as a spin-off game came to me when I saw that they added Inklings to Mario Kart. So why not have a full-on Splatoon racing game? Of course, to keep the same feel as a Splatoon game, you gotta leave ink wherever you race. So this game would play mostly like Mario Kart. You travel across a wacky environment at high speeds while lobbing weapons at each other. When you choose your racer, you'd get to pick a weapon, like splatter shot, roller, charger, etc., as well as the kind of kart that you'd like to race in. As you travel across the map, you can break open crates to obtain a temporary power-up, just like an item box in Mario Kart. This is how you get your hands on a classic secondary weapon, like a splat bomb, auto bomb, or even a splash wall. Of course, you'd still be able to make use of powerful specials like the Stingray, Killer Whale, and Bubbler. You'd fill your meter by inking the track and by finishing a lap. Also, you'd have very limited ink. The only way to refill it would be to race along your own ink, or completing a lap. Each race would be 3 laps long, and the maps would be designed so that the shortcuts actually let you loop back to an earlier part of the map. This seems counterintuitive at first, but hear me out. Although this is still primarily a racing game, the idea is to cover as much turf as you can. So here's how it would work. You get points for finishing all 3 laps. Obviously you get more points by finishing in first, second, and so on. But you also get points by having more of the racetrack covered in your team's ink than the opposing team's. So let's think more about how this would work. If your team is racing really fast and you're in the lead, then the enemies behind you can simply cover up your ink that you just laid down. This is where those shortcuts I mentioned earlier come into play. Taking these shortcuts would allow you to loop back to an earlier point in the track to continue inking the track without advancing the lap counter. This creates kind of a balancing act. How much do you focus on covering turf, and how fast do you want to complete the race? I imagine a couple different strategies could be employed. You could have a fast team member focus on finishing the race first to get big points for your team, while maybe the rest of the team focuses more on covering ink and protecting the leader. But that's all I've really got for now. I know these ideas aren't super fleshed out, but that's just sort of the thing. These are basic concepts. I aspire to be a game designer myself, so thinking about this sort of stuff interests me greatly. But what are your thoughts on these ideas? Do you think they have potential? If not, what other ideas could Nintendo use to expand the Splatoon universe? As always, thanks so much for watching, and have a blessed week.